I'm Teisha Bader with Shalom TV's news update for Thursday, February the 27th, 2014. IDF forces shot and killed a wanted Palestinian terror suspect today after he refused their calls to surrender. Israeli security forces had surrounded the home of the terror suspect in Berzeit, north of Ramallah today, and called on him to come out of the house and leave with them peacefully. However, those calls were refused and IDF soldiers then opened fire. The suspect was thought to have been affiliated with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. He had participated in and planned several terror attacks in the West Bank. 2 other suspects were arrested in the area as well. The incident set off violent riots in the area. About 150 Palestinians had to be dispersed by Israeli security forces. No injuries were reported. The IDF raised its alert level on Israel's border with Lebanon yesterday following threats from Hezbollah. As we reported to you, the Shiite terror group said it would retaliate against Israel for its alleged airstrikes on a convoy carrying weapons from Syria into Lebanon. IDF's Northern Command last night increased alert levels for forces stationed along the Lebanese border, and also instructed Israeli farmers tending to land near the border to keep a distance from the area.
In the effort to try.
Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry addressed the crisis in Syria and threats to Israel. He told MSNBC's Andrea Mitchell yesterday that the U.S. was aware that Syria was smuggling weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon.
No one is comfortable with where it is today. We all understand that this is a huge humanitarian crisis. It is putting pressure on Jordan, pressure on Lebanon. There are increasing threats from transfers from Assad to Hezbollah, and therefore threats to Israel. There are challenges to Turkey, and all of those countries are engaged in the discussion with us about what steps should be next. And I can guarantee you that every energy and effort of our administration is going into this discussion right now, and the President has taken no option off the table.
The New York Times reports that President Barack Obama will be getting more directly involved in peace efforts between Israel and the Palestinians, beginning with urging Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to agree to U.S. Secretary of State Kerry's framework agreement when the two meet in Washington this coming Monday. According to the report, the president's advisors said Obama will be jumping back into peace efforts, starting with his meeting with Netanyahu on March the 3rd. It's expected that later in the month, Obama will meet and make a similar appeal to Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. The Palestinians had announced earlier this week that Obama had invited Abbas to Washington next month, though a date was not announced. It is thought that Secretary of State Kerry would then present the framework deal by the end of April, when the 9-month deadline that he originally put into place expires. Former Middle East negotiator, now senior fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, Aaron David Miller, told the New York Times, regarding the Secretary of State's current peace efforts, Kerry is running into much heavier water on the substance, adding either he feels the need or they do to deploy the president. Miller says the president's involvement shows that he is willing to take a risk, but also shows the great challenges that still lie ahead in reaching a deal between Israel and the Palestinians. Miller asked, what is it going to take to get a comprehensive deal if the president has to do heavy lifting? Meanwhile, French news agency AFP reported that chief Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat rejected talk of extending negotiations with Israel. Lead negotiator Erekat told AFP that there is no meaning to prolonging the negotiation, even for one more additional hour, if Israel, represented by its current government, continues to disregard international law, apparently a reference to construction in the West Bank. At the same time, the Times of Israel reports that the Israeli government has unofficially and quietly halted settlement construction outside of the major settlement blocks for the past few months as a gesture towards peace talks and appeals from the United States. And Palestinian media reports that the recent talks held between Secretary of State Kerry and President Abbas in Paris were difficult and that Abbas was very upset with some of Kerry's suggestions for the framework deal, describing them as, quote, madness. Palestinian newspaper Al-Quds reported yesterday that among Kerry's demands was that Abbas recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Also, that Kerry offered the Arab town of Beit Hanina as the capital for a future Palestinian state instead of all of East Jerusalem. Al-Quds further reported that Kerry also suggested that Israel would keep 10 settlement blocks and that the Jordan Valley would not be part of a Palestinian state. There has not been any official confirmation of the Palestinian Papers report. Following a debate on the issue Tuesday in Israel's Knesset and the subsequent strong reaction from the Arab world, the Israeli Prime Minister's office stressed that no changes would be made to the current policy regarding the Temple Mount, the site considered holy by both Muslims and Jews. Netanyahu spokesman Mark Regev told the Jerusalem Post yesterday that the policy of the government of Israel has been and continues to be the maintenance of the status quo at the Temple Mount, including freedom of access for all faiths to the holy sites, adding the government has no intention of changing this policy. As we reported to you, the issue of limited Jewish access to the holy site was debated for the first time in the Knesset on Tuesday. The debate in turn sparked harsh criticism from the Arab world, including a petition of 47 lawmakers in the Jordanian parliament who called for the cancellation of the 1994 peace treaty with Israel. Arab League representatives also met in Cairo yesterday to discuss the matter. Since the Six-Day War in 1967, the Temple Mount has been jointly administered by the Jordanian government and the Waqf Muslim Religious Trust. We've been reporting to you this week on Jewish groups sending assistance to the Ukraine in light of the political upheaval and recent violence there. Add to that list now interfaith group, the International Fellowship of Christians and Jews, who announced that they are sending $1 million to help the Jewish community in Ukraine. Money that will go towards beefing up security at Jewish institutions and helping the elderly and needy. Fellowship president and founder Rabbi Yechiel Eckstein announced yesterday that after speaking with rabbis and Jewish community leaders in the Ukraine, it was clear that the situation on the ground there was critical. And the World Jewish Daily reports that an Israeli Knesset member, formerly from the Ukraine, is calling on Israel to devise a plan to bring Ukrainian Jews to the Jewish state. Yesh Atid party member Rina Frankel, who immigrated to Israel from Ukraine in 1990, wrote a letter to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu warning that incitement and anti-Semitism is growing in the region and that it was time to take action. Frankel urged the Prime Minister to put a plan together to bring Ukrainian Jews to Israel in a joint effort between the Prime Minister's office, the Foreign Ministry, the Immigration Absorption Ministry, the Diaspora Ministry, the Jewish Agency, and other organizations. The Israeli Embassy and the Jewish community of Japan donated 300 copies of the Diary of Anne Frank to replace those that were recently vandalized and damaged in libraries across Tokyo. As we reported to you last week, the diaries were defaced with pages ripped out of them in a slew of libraries across the capital, and police were still looking for the suspects responsible. At a ceremony in Suginami, whose libraries were a main target of the vandalism, Israeli Embassy Deputy Chief of Mission in Japan, Peleg Lewy, said he was shocked by the act, but stressed that it was not representative of the Japanese community. He said Japan is so known in Israel as a pacifist and as a very secure country. So this kind of act, referring to the vandalism, really made a big impression on us. Peleg said everyone understood that the vandalism was a single act that does not represent the Japanese people. And turning to our Shalom TV programming for tonight, Thursday, February the 27th, at 7:30, women of Reform Judaism are celebrated and honored at the recent biennial conference of the Union for Reform Judaism. That is followed by L'chaim at 9, where Mark Golub is joined by one of world Jewry's foremost authors, Anita Diamond. That's coming up tonight here on Shalom TV and ShalomTV.com. And that's Shalom TV's news update for Thursday, February the 27th, 2014. I'm Teisha Bader.